The Great Centennial Exhibition of 1876 was a celebration of America's 100th birthday, a showcase for new inventions, and a preview of the nation's vision for the future. But outside of the exhibition, America was a country divided over race, power, technology, and democracy, raising questions that still feel remarkably current. Ahead, I'll talk with the author of Centennial, the Great Fair of 1876, and the Invention of America's Future. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Fergus M. Bordewich has been an independent historian and writer since the early 1970s. He's the author of 10 nonfiction books, including Congress at War, The First Congress, and America's Great Debate, among others. He joins us to talk about Centennial. Fergus, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Thanks, Dan. I'm very happy to be with you.
Well, before we talk about the book itself, let's talk about the inspiration behind it. What attracted you to this event that you wanted to research it and share it with us?
Well, I came to it sort of through the back door, which is to say, in my previous book, Klan War, which was about Ulysses Grant's war against the Ku Klux Klan in the 1870s, I wrote at length about an extremely interesting officer named Major Lewis Merrill, who'd served in Missouri during the Civil War and who spearheaded Grant's campaign in South Carolina over the course of a couple of years. And when he was done there, he had a long furlough, and I read that he went to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was from Pennsylvania, to serve as an aide to the director of the Great Centennial Exhibition of 1876. And I thought, what do I know about that? And I didn't know anything about it, except that it had occurred. So searching for Merrill, I began digging into the Great Centennial, as everyone called it, the Centennial, the first American World's Fair, and realized, one, that it was a phantasmagorically large and complex phenomenon that aimed not just to illustrate, to embody the power and aspirations of the United States in its centennial year, but to reflect back, to take stock on the country's first century, as well as looking forward to the 20th century. Merrill, he barely figured. He did very little. I think basically it was a sinecure for a brief while. So Merrill passed out of my research, and I focused on the Centennial and then on people of unusual people, powerful people in different ways who factored into the Centennial, and then more broadly in what America was like in 1876 while it was celebrating the Centennial.
So as you pointed out, this was a fair that showcased all these wonderful new inventions about the new technology, kind of looking toward the future. But as you were doing that research, you discovered that perhaps the real story was what was happening outside of that exhibition instead of inside.
Yes, that is precisely correct. The Centennial Exhibition, it was an extraordinary event, not to diminish it in any way. There are 200 buildings, architecturally spectacular. Most states were represented, many foreign countries, and there's much to say about that. But in a way, the story was not just what the Centennial Exhibition said, but what it didn't say. And what I would say, a kind of misrepresentation by omission, which is to say, what was happening at the time? One, there was a fierce presidential contest underway, and its outcome was completely unclear until virtually the end. The winning candidate, Rutherford B. Hayes, was deemed the winner by one electoral vote involving some very questionable procedures. What else is happening? Reconstruction is disintegrating in the South. I write about this at great length. Newly empowered Black Republican voters are being barred from the polls through threats, violence and other nefarious activities. Labor and management strife is spiraling upward toward what will become the first national strike a few months after the Centennial closes. And indeed, while the Centennial is taking place, alongside news from it on the front pages of particularly Pennsylvania papers, there are stories about the executions, judicial lynchings is what I'm really talking about, of labor leaders just 90 miles north of the Centennial. Indian wars renewed in the West. In June, George Armstrong Custer's command is pretty much wiped out in Montana and spurs the end of Ulysses Grant's fairly enlightened peace policy and renewed war, the last great Indian War in the West. There's more than that, but you get the sense here that there's a great deal. The country's tearing itself apart in some ways, even though it was presenting to itself a rather grandiose, not entirely unjustified, but grandiose, gilded vision. It is the Gilded Age, of course, of itself in Philadelphia.
So you tell the story through four people, Rutherford B. Hayes being one of them. Tell us more about who you spotlight and why you chose them to exemplify what was going on during that time.
Yes. Well, I wanted to anchor this story, and it is a story. I wanted to anchor the narrative in people whom you could grab hold of and, in a sense, live with for the 6 months of the Centennial, and a bit longer than that. All four of these people were engaged with the Centennial in one way or another. One of them, very, very little known today, but a titan of his time, more familiar than Andrew Carnegie. They were contemporaries. Tom Scott, who was the president of the Philadelphia Railroad, a tough-minded, swaggering tycoon who stopped at nothing to build his railroad empire. The Pennsylvania Railroad was the most successful corporation in the world at the time. His power was unlimited. He dispatched people to Washington with suitcases of dollars to sway votes, and he exerted even more power in Pennsylvania. He and the Pennsylvania Railroad were the primary, but by no means the only backers of the Centennial. Okay. Rutherford B. Hayes, I've already mentioned, he's running for president. He will prevail. For most Americans who are even aware of him, he's a guy with a beard, one of the famous post-Civil War presidents who are hard for many people to remember. But he was a remarkable man in his own quiet, highly ethical way. He was a reformer, extremely brave. He was wounded 7 times in the Civil War in the front of his troops. Very well educated, an intellectually sophisticated man, and a true reformer. But he was carrying the burden of a Republican Party that had become no longer the party of reform, but the party of money and power. And indeed, for many Americans, of scandal. Money sloshing around wildly in Washington in the Gilded Age. A third individual is familiar to everyone. I'll come back to him in a moment. I don't want to leave off Edmonia Lewis. Edmonia Lewis is really unknown, although she's having a blip of rediscovery at the moment. There's an article about her in the New Yorker, to my surprise, this week. Edmonia Lewis was the first African-American sculptor in American history. She identified mostly as Black, but she was also half Native American. And when it was convenient to her, often for marketing purposes, she actually identified as an Indian. But at any rate, she was very successful. She worked in the neoclassical mode, which doesn't turn a lot of people on today, but it was really the highest form of aesthetic representation in her time. And her masterwork was exhibited at the Centennial. And talking about Edmonia Lewis is a way of talking about race, the anomalies of race. She was very successful. She was one of the wealthiest Black Americans, maybe the wealthiest in her time because of the prices that her sculptures commanded. And it's a way of really diving beneath the surface of race in the United States. I mean, she's a kind of counterexample, but it's also a way of talking about what's happening in the South and about the rampant discrimination against Black Americans in Philadelphia and at the Centennial. The most popular single eatery at the Centennial was something called the Southern Restaurant, in which the servers were dressed and acted like slaves. It's in Philadelphia. Anyway, the fourth person is the best known of all, Alexander Graham Bell, inventor of the telephone. The telephone is one of many inventions that are shown for the first time. And the telephone is immediately recognized for what it is, as a transformative device. And it'll be in production, commercial production, within a year after this. Quite remarkable. I liked writing a bit about Bell, partly because I did want readers to have somebody they could hold on to if they felt they already knew. But also, he was a lovely person. His letters are wonderful. They're all at the Library of Congress. He was a good writer. He was vivid. He was emotional. He wrote about his inner self, very unusual for the era. And he was a very reluctant exhibitor. He didn't think the telephone was good enough. He didn't even want to bring it. His fiancée, soon afterward his wife, kind of shanghaied him onto a train to get him to go to Philadelphia to exhibit it. So he's a great story. He's a great story. And all these people, of course, have afterlives as well. Tom Scott, whom I mentioned at the beginning, is also a way of talking about labor and capital. It's the Gilded Age, I say again. And you can't talk about the period without talking about money, greed, and power.
The thing is, as you describe all those things, they resonate with what's happening today, just in different ways. You talk about money and power in the Gilded Age. Today we talk about the 1% and their influence on government and just how much control they have. So tell us a little bit more about some of the parallels you see between what was happening then with what we're seeing now.
Well, there are a few, you're right. Well, one of them, and it looms large in the story as I tell it here, is that the Centennial as a phenomenon is about capitalism, money, and power. Okay? There are thousands of exhibits. Most of them, many have to do with art and other spheres, but the ones that awe people most have really to do with industrial power, industrial might. The United States has arrived as a world industrial power. Even European commentators remark on this. So in 1876 at the Centennial, you see the United States for the first time as kind of a globe-striding nation. And indeed, one of the images in the book, wonderful image, indeed shows Uncle Sam with his long legs stretched over the globe. It's remarkable. It tells you, right, in a single image, what Americans are thinking and what they're responding to. And of course, this is the first chapter, in a sense, of America as a global power. We are many chapters into that, and it's more complicated today. The power of money in politics and in America is, I want to say turbocharged, but it's an anachronism. But you get the idea that I'd mentioned Tom Scott earlier, and not only he, but other titans dispatch their agents to Washington and state capitals with suitcases full of cash dollars, which are handed out in hotel rooms to senators and congressmen and so on. Mark Twain wrote a very, very amusing novel called The Gilded Age, in which a composite senator character is represents the kind of corrupt spirit of the times. So I want to show money at work, but I'm not. This isn't a polemic. I mean, capitalism is building America. This is a fact. It happened. It's happening then. Railroads are the high tech of their era, the counterpart really to today's tech industry. Railroad titans are, like Tom Scott, are the era's counterparts to Elon Musk and such. They're larger than life, more powerful than Americans have ever seen. They stop at nothing. Politics is indeed pretty corrupt, not uniquely so. That can be exaggerated because there were a lot of Americans, and as now, who are shocked that there should be quid pro quos in government. Well, welcome to America. It wasn't new then. It's not new now, but it was pretty extreme in the 1870s. And Americans are trying to come to grips with that. How can you rein this in? Rutherford B. Hayes is a reformer. His rival in the election, Samuel Tilden of New York, governor of New York, probably the dullest presidential candidate in American history. Very hard to write about because he was really so dull. But he was also a reformer. He expected to win, but I think he put everybody to sleep. I'm being facetious, but he put me to sleep. Okay. Anyway, Hayes is much more interesting. And you see decent Americans, which is just, I mean honest Americans, honest political Americans, struggling with this culture and saying, is this bigger than all of us? Can we ever get it under control? Well, it took a generation, but yes, it did. It was a different America by the time the reformers and the progressives of the 20th century came along. But it began in the 1870s with people like Hayes. I mean, those are a couple of parallels. There is also, certainly in the South, this wrenching battle over voting. Who can vote? African Americans former slaves, have been freed, but are they actually going to be able to exercise their freedom and their vote? And all kinds of ploys are being invented to try to ensure that they don't vote, including shooting people. But the legal ploys are the most long-lasting ones, right up into, frankly, almost our own time, and in some ways are being replicated where they can be even today. So you see this happening. It's probably the most wrenching instance of this in 19th century American history. Well, you may have rights, but so what? But so what does it matter? We're not going to let you vote anyway. So yeah, there are more echoes of this sort.
I'm wondering, besides just being an echo, realizing that the more things change, the more they don't, are there lessons here? Are there things we can glean from what happened then that can help us get through what we're facing today?
Well, that's a big question. That's a big question. I'll say two things, two rather different things. One of them, and I'm speaking here as an historian, somebody who lives half the time in the past, and takes the past very seriously. And I would say that one lesson is we need to be able to look at our past, our American past, clearly and honestly, and not tell lies about it, not falsify it, not gild it. This country is 250 years old. We're grown up. Let's act like grown-ups. Let's see things as they were, a history full of contradictions. Yes, America was in 1876 and today dynamic economic power. Yes, there was a great deal of opportunity for people who didn't have so much. On the other hand, there was a degree of brutalization beneath the surface or not so far beneath the surface in parts of the country, whether it was treatment of working people, labor, unorganized. There are no labor unions at the time. There's no security net for working people, or we're talking about minorities, and specifically Black Americans, who are struggling to, as I said a minute ago, to exercise rights that they've won. Let's be clear about it. I mean, there's no reason to sweep this under the rug. I mean, in our own day, my heavens, you're well aware, I'm sure most of your listeners are too, that the powers that be in Washington ordered the National Park Service to completely revise the way it presents historic sites to minimize, if not eliminate, references to slavery and race. Geez, you know, I mean, the history of race in the United States is and of slavery and its implications is one of the central themes of American history. It's not the dominant one, but it's a central one, along with constitutionalism and the expansion of democracy. May be one that's painful to look at, but it existed and it exists. And Park Service, I've been there to Philadelphia. Maybe many people have, to the president's house where George Washington lived when he was president in the 1790s, and panels that referred to the enslavement of people in his house were ripped from the walls. I mean, they were literally ripped from the walls. It's a pretty bold illustration of what's going on. Well, we should really be more mature than that. I mean, frankly, it's an insult to history. It's an insult to the truth. It's an insult to us as citizens. But I will say, and this is kind of also America, the walls of that building are now papered over with mostly handwritten broadsides and placards telling the truth about what happened there. Americans have flocked to that, and visitors read those placards and see the torn patches on the walls. And, you know, I mean, Americans are still telling the truth to each other. Our government may be wanting to gild history the way the Centennial gilded much of the American past. You could go to the Centennial and you could see a wonderful display of George Washington's artifacts, his boots and his pistols and his traveling desk and things like this. And that's great. That's great. That's all real. George Washington was real. We should see those things. And George Washington is, I mean, if one's honest, he's inspiring. He's more complicated than we think, but he was inspiring. But at the same time, Black Americans were excluded, permitted apparently only on segregated days. Some controversy about this. And working people couldn't afford the entry charge to the Centennial. There are very few of them, unless they're brought in by their paternalistic employers. So it's a rendering of America as people in power, particularly corporations, I dare say, want America to be seen. But let's not look at the other 50% of the truth. Well, I think we should be bigger than that. Okay. And another, you asked about lessons, and I don't want to take too long to answer that, but it's an important question. Americans in the 19th century had immense respect for their institutions. It's only 100 years. There were Revolutionary War veterans alive into the 1870s, a handful of them. And the country was full of people, men, families, women, whose grandfathers fought in the Revolution. Some founders, James Madison, lived till 1836, you know, well within the living memory of people in 1876. Americans loved their institutions. They loved Congress. They might not like their particular congressman or their senator, but they loved the institutions. They believed in them. They knew that their republic was the only one on earth. And it was a great hope for the rest of the world, for mankind, and so on. They understood that. They also understood how government worked. They read newspapers prodigiously. Even if people weren't all that literate, somebody in the neighborhood would sit down on a stump and read the paper to them. People knew how government worked, and they knew it was unique, and they were proud of it. We're in an age here where where approval ratings for Congress are shocking. It's down to single digits in some polls, as well as members of Congress and people who work in other great institutions, journalism being another one, and so on. And I think we're paying a terrible political price for this, for people's loss of faith and loss of confidence in the institutions. It's one thing to think that your congressman may be a jerk. It's another thing to say that Congress is a flop. Who needs it? That is danger. When you're thinking that way, you don't believe in democracy anymore, and you don't understand what a republic is, and you don't understand that conflict and contention, partisanship were baked into it from the beginning. None of the founders thought it was going to, that democracy Republican government was going to be a cakewalk. There was no golden age. Golden ages don't exist. They're fantasies. Whether you project them into the past, as some people do, or into the future, as other people do. They're fantasies. They're myths. Potent, but myths nonetheless. And, I would have liked this 250th celebration to really have focused. It would have required years of preparation. It didn't happen. Into kind of restoring understanding of our institutions. And you can do that on a propaganda level that's very superficial, or you can do it by re-educating people in all kinds of creative ways, on all levels. And I'm talking here at least about adults, not just grade school kids, but certainly kids. And restoring civic education in the schools. Does that sound like a snore? I guess it does to a lot of people, but we're paying a price now for having pushed it out of schools for 50 years. And we have too many people who don't understand what our government is as a result.
There is much more in this book that we won't have time to talk about. So to learn more, the book is Centennial, The Great Fair of 1876 and the Invention of America's Future by Fergus M. Bordewich. Fergus, thank you for talking with me today.
Well, thank you, Dan. It's been a great pleasure.
If you'd like to purchase Centennial, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. I'm Dan Skenner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.